When people hear the words new driving rules, the first reaction is usually confusion, followed quickly by concern. And that's exactly why it's important to slow this down and explain clearly what is actually changing in February 2026, and why this announcement matters so much, especially for drivers aged 65 and older. This isn't about panic, and it's not about taking anyone's keys away overnight. It's about understanding a shift that is already set in motion and knowing how it could affect everyday life if it's ignored. Starting in February 2026, updated driving regulations are scheduled to take effect that place new conditions on how licenses are reviewed, renewed, and in some cases restricted for older drivers. These rules don't arrive out of nowhere. They are the result of years of discussion among transportation agencies, lawmakers, insurers, and public safety officials, who argue that the current system no longer reflects today's roads, traffic density, or vehicle technology. The announcement makes one thing clear: age will now play a more direct role in how driving eligibility is assessed. For decades, the process of renewing a driver's license has been relatively simple for most people. Fill out a form, take a quick vision test, get your photo taken, and walk out with a renewed license. What's changing in 2026 is the assumption that this one-size-fits-all approach works equally well for everyone, regardless of age. Regulators are now saying that it doesn't, and that seniors, particularly those 65 and older, require a more individualized review to ensure safety on the road. The new rules are expected to introduce additional screening measures at the renewal stage for older drivers. While not every senior will be affected in the same way, the framework itself represents a major shift. Instead of focusing solely on driving history, authorities will place more weight on age-related factors that may affect reaction time, vision clarity, and overall driving ability. This doesn't automatically mean failing a test or losing a license, but it does mean the renewal process may no longer be quick or automatic. Another important part of what's changing is timing. February 2026 isn't just a random date on a calendar. It marks the point at which newly approved regulations move from planning into enforcement. From that moment on, drivers renewing or updating their licenses will be subject to the new standards. That means anyone who waits until the last minute, especially seniors close to renewal age, could find themselves unprepared for requirements they didn't expect. There's also a wider context here that can't be ignored. Roads today look very different than they did 20 or 30 years ago. Traffic is heavier, vehicles are faster, and distractions are everywhere. Officials argue that these conditions make it necessary to reevaluate how driver fitness is measured, particularly for age groups statistically more vulnerable to injury. Whether people agree or disagree with that reasoning, the rules are moving forward, and awareness is the first line of protection. What's especially important to understand is that these new driving rules are not framed as punishments. They are framed as preventive measures. The language used by regulators focuses on safety, risk reduction, and early identification of potential problems. But from the perspective of seniors, the effect can still feel restrictive. For many older adults, driving is independence. It's the ability to go to the grocery store, attend medical appointments, visit family, and live life without relying on others. Any change that touches driving rights naturally feels personal. This is why February 2026 matters so much. It's the moment when abstract discussions turn into real-world consequences. It's when renewal notices, test requirements, and compliance deadlines begin reflecting the new reality. Seniors who are unaware of the changes could face delays, denials, or temporary suspensions simply because they weren't prepared. And that's exactly what this conversation is meant to prevent. Understanding what's changing also allows time to plan. It gives drivers the opportunity to check license expiration dates, schedule eye exams early, speak with doctors if needed, and gather documentation ahead of time. Those who prepare will be in a much stronger position than those who are caught off guard by a system that suddenly feels unfamiliar. It's also important to recognize that these rules may not look identical everywhere. While the overall framework is being rolled out at a national or regional level, the details can vary depending on local authorities. That means the impact may differ from one place to another, making it even more important for seniors to stay informed about how the changes apply where they live. At its core, this announcement is a warning and an opportunity at the same time, a warning that the rules of the road are evolving, and an opportunity to stay ahead of the changes instead of reacting to them later. February 2026 isn't far away, and the drivers who take this seriously now will be the ones who avoid unnecessary stress, confusion, and loss of mobility down the line. Once the changes themselves are understood, the next question naturally comes up: why are seniors being singled out in the first place? That question matters, because without context, these new rules can feel unfair or even targeted. The reality, though, is more complicated, and it sits at the intersection of data, demographics, and how modern roads now function. This isn't about ageism, and it isn't about assuming that turning 65 suddenly makes someone an unsafe driver. It's about how risk is measured and how policymakers respond to patterns they believe they can't ignore anymore. One of the biggest reasons seniors are at the center of these changes is simple math. The population is aging. More people are living longer, healthier lives, and they are driving well into their 70s and 80s. That's a good thing in many ways, but it also means there are more older drivers on the road today than at any point in history. When the number of drivers in a certain age group increases, even small risks become more visible in statistics. Regulators don't just look at individual drivers, they look at trends across millions of miles driven. Accident data plays a large role in shaping these policies. Studies often show that while seniors tend to drive more cautiously, they are more likely to suffer serious injury or death in crashes due to physical vulnerability. Reaction times can slow, vision can decline, and recovery from sudden events becomes harder with age. Again, this doesn't apply to everyone, but policymakers build rules based on averages, not exceptions. From their perspective, identifying risk earlier is better than responding after something goes wrong. Insurance companies also influence this conversation more than most people realize. Insurers track claims, medical costs, and long-term liabilities. When they see higher payouts connected to certain age groups, pressure builds to address those risks at the policy level. That pressure often finds its way to lawmakers and transportation authorities, who then justify new requirements as necessary for public safety and cost control. Seniors become the focus not because they are bad drivers, but because the financial and medical consequences of accidents involving older drivers tend to be more severe. There's also the issue of changing vehicle technology. Modern cars are packed with features that didn't exist years ago. Touchscreens, driver assist systems, lane warnings, adaptive cruise control, all of these are designed to improve safety, but they also add complexity. For drivers who learned to drive decades ago, adapting to these systems can be challenging. Regulators argue that periodic reassessment helps ensure drivers are still comfortable and capable in vehicles that function very differently than those of the past. Another factor that often goes unspoken is accountability. When accidents happen, especially serious ones, there's always a search for responsibility. If an older driver is involved, questions quickly arise about whether the system failed to catch warning signs earlier. Governments and agencies don't want to be accused of negligence for allowing someone to drive without a DECWA. TE review. Stricter rules create a paper trail that shows steps were taken, even if those steps feel burdensome to the individuals affected. Public perception also plays a role. High-profile incidents involving older drivers can shift opinion quickly, even if they are statistically rare. A single tragic story can spark calls for reform, leading to broad policies aimed at preventing similar events. Unfortunately, broad policies don't always account for personal capability. A healthy, alert 75-year-old may be safer than a distracted 30-year-old, but policy doesn't work on a case-by-case basis unless it's forced to. What makes this especially sensitive is that driving is deeply tied to identity and independence. For many seniors, being able to drive represents self-reliance. Losing that ability can feel like losing control over one's life. Policymakers say they understand this, but from their perspective, they are balancing individual freedom against public safety. That balance is where seniors often feel the weight of these decisions the most. It's also important to understand that age-based rules already exist in subtle ways. Shorter license renewal cycles, vision tests, and medical reporting requirements for older drivers are not new. What's happening now is an expansion and tightening of those measures, driven by the belief that current safeguards aren't enough. February 2026 represents the moment when those concerns officially reshape the rules. This focus on seniors doesn't mean younger drivers are risk-free. In fact, younger age groups often have higher accident rates. But younger drivers are usually addressed through education, graduated licenses, and penalties. Seniors, on the other hand, are addressed through monitoring and reassessment. Different tools for different risks, at least in the eyes of regulators. Understanding why seniors are the focus doesn't mean agreeing with every part of the policy, but it does make one thing clear. These changes are not random, and they are not temporary. They are part of a long-term shift in how driving ability is evaluated as the population ages. Ignoring that reality won't stop it from happening. The better approach is to recognize the reasoning behind the rules, stay informed, and prepare to protect both driving privileges and personal independence before someone else makes that decision for you. Now let's talk about one of the most practical and immediate parts of these changes, because this is where many seniors will feel the impact first, and that's the license renewal process itself. For years, renewing a driver's license has been routine, almost automatic. You mark the date, show up, fill out a form, maybe take a quick vision test, and you're done. That sense of simplicity is exactly what is changing, and for drivers 65 and older, the renewal process beginning in February 2026 is expected to look very different than what they've been used to. Under the new rules, license renewal is no longer treated as a basic administrative step for seniors. Instead, it becomes a more detailed review. The idea behind this shift is that age alone doesn't determine driving ability, but age can increase the likelihood of certain conditions that affect safe driving. Because of that, regulators want more frequent and more thorough check-ins. This means longer renewal cycles that once lasted many years may be shortened, requiring seniors to renew more often than younger drivers. One of the most noticeable changes is the increased likelihood of in-person renewals. While online or mail-in renewals have become common, especially in recent years, seniors may now be required to appear in person more frequently. The reasoning is simple from the regulator's point of view. In-person renewals allow for direct observation and immediate testing if necessary. But for seniors, this can be inconvenient, stressful, and time-consuming, especially for those with mobility issues or limited transportation options. Paperwork is also expected to increase. Renewal forms may now include additional questions related to health, medications, or recent medical evaluations. While answering these questions doesn't automatically disqualify anyone from driving, failing to disclose required information could create problems later. Seniors who are not prepared for these forms may find themselves delayed or flagged for further review simply because they didn't know what was coming. Another significant change involves the documentation required at renewal. In some cases, seniors may be asked to provide proof of recent medical checkups, vision exams, or physician statements. This doesn't mean every senior will need a doctor's note, but the option for authorities to request one will be more clearly built into the process. That alone represents a major shift from the past, when medical involvement was usually triggered only after an incident or complaint. The timeline of renewals is also critical. Missing a renewal deadline under the new system could carry more serious consequences. What once might have resulted in a simple late fee could now lead to a temporary suspension or the need to restart the process entirely. Seniors who assume the system still works the old way may be caught off guard when they discover that driving privileges have been paused until new requirements are met. There's also the issue of conditional renewals. Instead of a full, unrestricted license, some seniors may receive a license with conditions attached. These conditions could include shorter expiration dates, required follow-up evaluations, or limitations based on individual assessments. While this allows many seniors to keep driving, it also introduces a level of oversight that didn't previously exist for most drivers. What's important to understand is that these changes don't mean seniors are presumed unfit to drive. Rather, the system is moving toward ongoing evaluation instead of long-term approval. From a policy standpoint, this is seen as proactive. From a personal standpoint, it can feel intrusive. That emotional reaction is valid, and it's why preparation is so important. The renewal process is also where confusion can easily arise. Because rules may vary depending on location, two seniors living in different areas could face very different requirements. One might renew with minimal hassle, while another might be asked for additional testing or documentation. Without awareness, this inconsistency can feel unfair, even though it's built into how local authorities implement broader regulations. This is why planning ahead becomes essential. Seniors who track their renewal dates, schedule routine vision exams, and stay organized with medical records will be far less stressed when renewal time comes. Waiting until a renewal notice arrives may no longer be enough. By then, appointments may be booked, deadlines may be tight, and options may be limited. Families also need to pay attention. Adult children and caregivers often assume that license renewal is handled quietly and independently. Under the new rules, seniors may need support navigating the process, gathering documents, or understanding conditional approvals. Open conversations now can prevent frustration and conflict later. Ultimately, these new license renewal requirements are not just administrative changes. They represent a shift in how driving privileges are viewed for older adults. Driving is no longer treated as a lifetime skill that fades quietly into the background. It's treated as an ability that must be reaffirmed periodically, with more scrutiny as age increases. Another major area where these new rules begin to feel very real is testing, specifically vision, medical, and cognitive evaluations. For many seniors, this is the part that raises the most anxiety, because it feels personal. It's one thing to fill out paperwork or show up for a renewal appointment. It's another thing entirely to fee. Like your health and mental sharpness are being judged. But under the updated driving rules taking effect in February 2026, these assessments are becoming a more formal and expected part of the process for drivers 65 and older. Vision testing has always existed in some form, but what's changing is how seriously it will be taken and how often it may be required. Instead of a basic eye chart test that can be passed quickly, some seniors may face more detailed evaluations. Depth perception, peripheral vision, and contrast sensitivity are all areas regulators are paying closer attention to. The reasoning is that modern driving demands faster visual processing than ever before, and subtle declines that once went unnoticed can now pose real risks in busy traffic. Medical evaluations are also expanding in scope. Seniors may be asked to disclose certain conditions or medications that could affect driving ability. This doesn't mean having a diagnosis automatically disqualifies someone from driving. Many conditions are manageable, and many medications do not interfere with safe driving. However, the expectation is shifting toward transparency. Authorities want confirmation that conditions are being treated and monitored, not ignored. What's especially important to understand is that these medical disclosures are not designed to trap seniors or take away their licenses unfairly. They are meant to identify red flags early. From a policy standpoint, catching potential issues before an accident happens is considered responsible governance. From a personal standpoint, it can feel like an invasion of privacy. That tension is at the heart of why this part of the rules is so controversial. Cognitive testing is perhaps the most sensitive topic of all. Memory, reaction time, and decision-making are essential for safe driving, but they are also deeply tied to personal dignity. The idea of being evaluated in this way can feel insulting, especially to seniors who have decades of GRI. Ving experience without serious incidents. However, regulators argue that cognitive decline can be gradual and difficult to self-detect. Testing, in their view, provides an objective snapshot rather than relying on self-assessment. It's important to note that cognitive testing is not expected to be applied universally or randomly. In many cases, it may be triggered by age thresholds, medical reports, or previous driving concerns. That means not every senior will face the same level of evaluation. Still, the possibility alone is enough to cause worry, especially when the rules are not fully understood. Another concern is how these tests are administered. Seniors often worry about being evaluated under pressure, in unfamiliar environments, or by people who don't understand their daily functioning. A poor performance on a single test can feel like it outweighs years of safe driving. This is why preparation matters so much. Knowing what types of evaluations may be required allows seniors to approach them calmly and confidently instead of being caught off guard. There's also the issue of follow-up. Failing or struggling with part of an evaluation doesn't always mean losing a license immediately. In many cases, it may lead to additional testing, temporary restrictions, or recommendations for corrective measures such as updated eyewear or medication adjustments. But that process takes time, and during that time, driving privileges may be limited. Seniors who depend on driving for daily life can feel the impact quickly. Doctors play a complicated role in this system as well. Medical professionals may be asked to provide opinions or documentation related to driving fitness. This can strain the doctor-patient relationship, especially if a physician feels obligated to report concerns. Seniors may worry that being honest with their doctor could lead to consequences they can't control. At the same time, withholding information can create legal and safety risks. The key takeaway here is that these evaluations are becoming a standard part of the process, not an exception. Ignoring that reality doesn't make it go away. What does help is staying proactive. Regular eye exams, routine health checkups, and open conversations with healthcare providers can make these assessments far less intimidating. When documentation is current and conditions are well managed, evaluations are more likely to confirm driving fitness rather than raise concerns. It's also worth remembering that these rules are being introduced under the banner of safety, not punishment. Whether one agrees with them or not, the system is shifting toward prevention. Seniors who understand this shift can approach testing as a verification of ability rather than a threat to independence. Another part of these changes that doesn't get talked about enough is the idea of restricted or conditional licenses. For many seniors, this is where the rules begin to feel less theoretical and more personal. The company concern isn't always about losing the ability to drive entirely, but about losing the freedom to drive when, where, and how one chooses. Under the new driving rules taking effect in February 2026, restricted licenses are expected to be used more often as a middle ground between full approval and complete suspension. A restricted license is exactly what it sounds like. It allows a person to keep driving, but only under certain conditions. These conditions might include driving only during daylight hours, avoiding highways or high-speed roads, limiting travel to a specific distance from home, or requiring corrective devices such as glasses at all times. From a regulatory perspective, this approach is seen as a compromise that keeps people mobile while reducing perceived risk. For seniors, however, these restrictions can quietly reshape daily life. Daylight-only driving might sound reasonable on paper, but it can mean giving up evening social events, religious services, or even winter dry. Ving when daylight hours are short. Distance limits can make it harder to visit family, attend specialized medical appointments, or maintain routines that rely on travel beyond a narrow radius. What makes restricted licenses particularly challenging is that they often arrive with little room for negotiation. Once a condition is placed on a license, violating it can lead to serious consequences. Driving outside permitted hours or areas, even unintentionally, can result in fines, further restrictions, or full suspension. Seniors who are not fully aware of their license conditions may find themselves in trouble without realizing they did anything wrong. Another issue is how restrictions are determined. They may be based on test results, medical input, or administrative guidelines rather than real-world driving behavior. A senior could have decades of accident-free driving and still receive restrictions due to a single assessment. That disconnect can feel deeply unfair, especially when the individual feels capable and alert behind the wheel. There's also the emotional impact to consider. Being told that driving is allowed, but only under limitations, can feel like a quiet loss of trust. It sends a message that independence is conditional. For many seniors, this can affect confidence, not just in driving, but in other areas of life as well. Confidence matters on the road, and feeling uncertain or restricted can actually make driving more stressful. Family dynamics often change when restricted licenses enter the picture. Adult children may feel pressure to monitor driving habits, remind parents of limitations, or intervene when they believe restrictions aren't being followed. This can create tension, even when everyone involved has good intentions. Seniors may feel watched or judged, while families worry about safety and legal consequences. Another concern is how law enforcement handles restricted licenses. Officers may be more likely to scrutinize senior drivers, especially if a license indicates conditions. A routine traffic stop can quickly become complicated if there's any question about compliance. Even a misunderstanding can escalate into a serious problem, particularly if documentation isn't clear or readily available. Despite these challenges, restricted licenses are becoming more common because they align with the broader philosophy behind the new rules. Instead of an all-or-nothing approach, authorities are opting for graduated permissions. This allows them to say they are balancing safety with independence, even if the balance doesn't always feel fair to those affected. The key for seniors is awareness and strategy. Understanding what restrictions mean, how they are enforced, and what options exist for review or appeal can make a significant difference. In some cases, restrictions can be adjusted or removed with additional documentation, follow-up evaluations, or demonstrated compliance over time. But none of that is possible if a senior doesn't know their rights or assumes the decision is final and unchangeable. It's also important for seniors to reflect honestly on their own driving patterns. Restrictions may align with habits they already follow, such as avoiding night driving or long trips. In those cases, a restricted license may not change daily life as much as feared. The problem arises when restrictions conflict with essential needs, and that's where planning becomes crucial. Public transportation, ride-sharing, and family support may become part of the conversation sooner than expected. While no one wants to think about alternatives to driving, having backup options reduces the stress that comes with restrictions. It turns a loss of freedom into a managed transition rather than a sudden shock. Restricted licenses are not a sign that driving is over, but they are a signal that the system is watching more closely. Seniors who understand this can approach restrictions as a phase to manage, not a verdict to fear. Because in a system that increasingly relies on conditions and limitations, staying informed and intentional is the difference between adapting on your own terms and having boundaries imposed without warning.